Man thought he discovered a harmless molehill in his lawn, but when specialists took a closer look, they told him to lock all the doors immediately. In rural Kent, 46-year-old Daniel Harper noticed a strange mound of soil that seemed to grow a little larger every day near his back fence. At first, he shrugged it off as the work of moles or rabbits common in the area, but within a week, the mound had doubled in size, and several smaller ones began dotting the grass around it. Alarmed, Daniel decided to call in a team from a local wildlife agency to check it out. Moments after they began their inspection with ground scanning equipment, the lead specialist froze, his expression drained of color, and he immediately told Daniel to get inside the house and not to come back out. What they had found beneath the soil was nothing Daniel could have ever imagined. Daniel barely had time to shut his back door before the specialists outside started moving quickly across his garden, hauling their equipment back towards the gate as if every second counted. Through the glass, he could see the lead inspector, a tall man with a weather-worn face, speaking sharply into a radio. His tone was calm but urgent, the kind of voice used when a situation is far more dangerous than anyone wants to admit out loud. Daniel's chest tightened. Up until that morning, he'd thought the strange mound in his garden was nothing more than a nuisance. Now, with the experts practically sprinting to leave, he realized he'd been sitting on top of something he never could have imagined. For several long minutes, Daniel just stood frozen in his kitchen, staring out at the dark mound of soil near his fence. The longer he looked at it, the more unnatural it seemed. The surface almost appeared to shift, like it was alive, breathing under the weight of the earth. Then a faint ripple ran across the top, so slight that if he hadn't been staring so hard, he might have missed it. His pulse hammered in his ears. He pulled the curtains shut. It was nearly half an hour before anyone knocked on his door again. When Daniel opened it, the same lead inspector stood there, flanked by two men in protective gear he hadn't seen before. They wore heavy boots and carried sealed containers marked with warning labels that made Daniel's stomach twist. The inspector introduced himself properly this time. His name was Dr. Ellis, a field specialist with over 20 years' experience in pest control and subterranean wildlife research. But even as he spoke, his eyes kept darting back towards the garden, as though he couldn't bear to take his focus away from the mound for too long. Dr. Ellis explained in a low voice that what Daniel had discovered wasn't a molehill or any kind of burrow he'd ever encountered before. Their initial scan had picked up something far more complex beneath the soil, a vast interconnected network stretching far deeper than a typical animal tunnel. According to Ellis, the shape of the chambers suggested a highly organized colony. "We're not dealing with rabbits or moles," he said gravely. "This is something else entirely." Daniel felt his mouth go dry. "What do you mean, something else?" he asked. The doctor paused, then admitted, "We think you're sitting on one of the largest invasive ant colonies ever recorded in this part of the country." Daniel could hardly process the words. Ants? How dangerous could ants really be? But Dr. Ellis didn't let him cling to that thought for long. He explained that these weren't ordinary ants. The equipment had detected rapid movement within the chambers, swarms of insects moving in coordinated waves. The density readings suggested millions, maybe tens of millions, of them packed into a labyrinthine structure under his lawn. And the species? Likely fire ants, known not just for their aggressive behavior, but for stings that could cause severe allergic reactions, sometimes fatal. At that, Daniel felt a chill run through him. He'd read stories about invasive fire ant colonies in far-flung countries, but he'd never expected to find one in his own back garden. The men in protective suits began laying out more gear along the edge of the patio, careful not to set foot on the grass. Daniel noticed they avoided stepping near the smaller mounds, which by now seemed to dot nearly every corner of the garden. If one of those surfaces gives way under your weight, Ellis warned him, you could be covered in ants within seconds. From that moment on, Daniel stayed well away from the windows. The thought of what was beneath his garden made his skin crawl. Every time he thought of stepping outside, he pictured millions of tiny venomous creatures just inches below the soil waiting. As the day wore on, more vehicles arrived, unmarked vans carrying equipment Daniel had only ever seen in documentaries. Men and women in head-to-toe protective clothing stepped out, carrying heavy crates. They looked more like scientists preparing for a hazardous materials operation than pest controllers. By late afternoon, Ellis returned inside to brief Daniel again. He explained that the colony's size was unprecedented in the region. Not only had the ants created one enormous mound, but they had spread into multiple satellite mounds, all interconnected. This meant the queen, or possibly several queens, had been laying eggs unchecked for a very long time. The colony wasn't just thriving, it was expanding at an alarming rate. Daniel asked how long it had likely been there. Ellis's answer unsettled him even further. Months at least, he said, possibly years. You've been living right on top of it without realizing. The team spent the evening preparing for what they called containment and preservation. They couldn't simply exterminate the colony the way you might handle a normal infestation. Its sheer scale made it far too dangerous. If they used poison, the ants might scatter underground, creating new colonies elsewhere. If they disturbed the mound too much, the swarm could erupt onto the surface. Their solution, Ellis explained, was both drastic and extraordinary. They would pour a special concrete mixture deep into the tunnels, sealing the colony in place. Once hardened, it would create a perfect cast of the underground structure, a frozen snapshot of one of the most organized insect societies ever recorded in Britain. Daniel could hardly believe what he was hearing. The idea of turning his own back garden into a monument to an ant colony sounded absurd. Yet as Ellis described the danger, he realized there was no other choice. The operation began at dawn the next morning. Daniel watched from the safety of his upstairs window as the team drilled carefully into the main mound, inserting long metal pipes connected to heavy machinery. When the concrete mixture began flowing, a low rumble filled the air, vibrating through the soil. For hours, the liquid sank deeper into the labyrinth beneath. At one point, Daniel thought he saw movement at the edge of the mound, a rush of ants pouring out, only to be met by workers with protective gear, who quickly sprayed a containment barrier. It took nearly 6 hours for the team to finish pumping the mixture into the tunnels. Then they waited. For the rest of the day, the garden was silent. Not a single ant appeared on the surface. It was as if the entire colony had been locked away beneath the hardened stone. Several days later, the excavation began. Using diggers and careful hand tools, they unearthed the cast of the colony. Daniel could hardly believe his eyes. What emerged was a vast, intricate network of chambers and tunnels, stretching meters in every direction. It resembled an alien city frozen in stone. The specialist measured it and confirmed their suspicions. It was one of the largest fire ant colonies ever documented in the country. Millions of ants had once lived within it, each chamber built with precision, each tunnel branching in deliberate patterns. The cast was so extraordinary that wildlife authorities decided to preserve it. Instead of breaking it apart, they carefully transported the entire structure to a research facility, where it would later be displayed as a monument to the hidden world beneath our feet. For Daniel, the experience changed everything. The garden he had once tended with such ease now felt like dangerous ground. Even after the excavation was complete, he admitted he still felt uneasy walking across the grass. The knowledge of what had been lurking beneath the soil, a super colony of millions, right under his nose, left him with a permanent sense of unease. "I used to think ants were harmless," he told Ellis during one of their final visits. "Now I'll never look at my garden the same way again." Ellis nodded knowingly. "That's the thing about nature," he said. "It doesn't always stay where we expect it. Sometimes the most dangerous things are the ones we overlook." And with that, Daniel realized how close he'd come to a disaster. If he hadn't called the specialist when he did, the colony might have spread far beyond his garden into the surrounding neighborhood. It was a chilling thought, one that would stay with him for the rest of his life.